What's going on YouTube? It's Teach back again with another video, and today we are handing out more off-season grades today, talking about the AFC South. This is a fun one to talk about because of the all the new young quarterbacks coming to the division: C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis. This is a division that's kind of turning a new leaf, and I'm excited to see where they go long term. But today we're talking about the 2023 offseason for the Texans, the Colts, the Titans, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Let me hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. Which of these four teams won the NFL draft, won free agency, and won the offseason as a whole? Love to hear your thoughts on the AFC South down below in the comment section. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to hit that like button. If you're new around here, want to see more football content, hit that subscribe button down below as well. And let's go ahead and jump right into it, starting with the Houston Texans. And I'm not factoring in head coaching hires, but I gotta say, D'Amico Ryans, that was my favorite head coaching hire, and I love the fact that Houston now has a guy that I think David Culley and Lovie Smith are both good character guys and good, leaders of men to have at the front of a room. But I think D'Amico Ryans is that, but an even better X's and O coach. So I feel like the best version of what they've had previously with Culley and Lovie Smith. So not factoring that in the grades here, but if you are, I totally respect that, and I think it's a great hire there. I'm also excited to see Bobby Slowick there as the OC, first-time play caller, and a first-time offensive coordinator coming from San Francisco. But free agency grade, I'll go with a B. Robert Woods, solid addition. I'm not factoring in a trade for the free agency grade. I'm just focusing on signings, but we'll talk about Shaq Mason a little bit later on. I think my favorite signing, though, is Jimmy Ward. The continuity between him and D'Amico Ryans is obviously interesting. It'll be kind of tricky to see what this means for Jalen Petrie, who's this kind of box safety. You can play a little bit of nickel corner, but maybe Jimmy Ward, who found a really nice home for himself in San Francisco, playing the slot. Maybe Ward does continue to play in the nickel. They also have Desmond King, who is a slot corner only, so still got some things to figure out there. But Ward plus Petrie, really excited about what that tandem could do, especially if Petrie cleans up his tackling. And then, kind of where Desmond King fits in the mix. But really like the Jimmy Ward signing, especially considering, again, his, chemistry and continuity with D'Amico Ryans. But overall, solid free agency. Nothing that was, crazy and changes the complexion of this team or anything like that. But I think one of the better free agency that we've seen so far during the Nick Caserio era. NFL draft grade, I'll go B-. It's just tough because I love Tank Dell. Love the value they got with that in the third round. C.J. Stroud, obviously the most important pick here, trying to get that quarterback of the future and trying to stir this rebuild. And let's see what Nick Caserio has really been up to, right? Let's see what, now they have the quarterback in place, let's see what this roster looks like. Because it was hard to tell, with previous quarterbacks playing, like a Davis Mills, who was better than I thought, but still not a top, 20 quarterback in the league. So, and then also you get Will Anderson. This team needed edge rusher, and, in a world where you can leave a draft with C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson, that sounds great, but they did give up a lot of draft capital to make that move. But also you add Juice Scruggs, who that felt like a little bit of an early pick, but add some interior offensive line depth, some guard center flexibility. Same can be said about Jarrett Patterson and also Xavier Hutchinson, who they added out of Iowa State in the later D3 part of the NFL draft. Some vertical field stretching, big body type of wide receiver in the mix. Okay, there's a lot to like. Maybe you could say it should be a B, but they did give up a lot of assets to get Will Anderson. So I'm a little bit lower on this this grade here than I think others are, just taking into account all the assets they did give up. But when you look at the names, I think it's a solid draft. Specifically, of course, Will Anderson, cornerstone, building block for the defense, and then C.J. Stroud's what you're going to build your offense around. So moving on to the offseason grade, B+ overall. Again, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about if you're a Houston fan. And if I'm being honest, best move is C.J. Stroud, right? Because you need the quarterback. It's the most important position in the game. You got to get an answer there. But just for the sake of being able to talk about it, I'll go with the Shaq Mason trade, right? Kenyon Green, you're hoping to see him play better at left guard in year 2. And, one of the other spots where I felt like this team could really use an upgrade was center and right guard. And they basically get Shaq Mason for pennies on the dollars in a trade. And then they extend him, and he's kind of getting a solid contract for someone of his age. But still, they're not shelling out a bunch of big bucks to a solid, guard who even last year and maybe a little bit of a down year in Tampa Bay was still at least a league average player. And for an offensive line that's looking for league average as an upgrade over A.J. Cann at right guard, that's a sizable upgrade. I think Shaq Mason can be even better than what he was last year in Tampa Bay. So love that move. Wanted to talk about it. So I'll call it the quote-unquote best move of the offseason, but just know C.J. Stroud is really the best move of the offseason. Biggest question mark left, I'll go wide receiver, and the player who could step up, Tank Dell. This is my chance to talk about one of my favorite players and one of my favorite wide receivers from the NFL draft. He was a volume target guy at Houston. Yeah, he's a little small, and he's a little slightly built, not a whole lot of weight under him, but a right runner I think that can win at all 3 levels. Great over-the-top weapon, but also has a ton of yak ability, soft hands, and an awesome release package. And I mean, you go back to the Senior Bowl against a group of pretty good corners. there was nobody who could check him at the line of scrimmage or keep up with him and his route running in general. So I think he could be potentially the guy that steps up and be that number one wide receiver. Honorable mentions, of course, to Robert Woods. You sign a veteran, you're hoping to lean on him, especially early on. But also John Mechie III. Missed all of last year with leukemia. Now he's back on the field and practicing. Maybe he could be a big-time impact player from the slot, and maybe right away the number one target for CJ Stroud. Wouldn't shock me whatsoever. All right, let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts now. 4-12-1 last year, a disappointing squad. I thought they would win the division. They were my pick to win the AFC South, but obviously fell way short of that. For agency grade, I'll go C+. This was a team that just didn't do a whole lot. And really, the main signing of note was Samson Ebukam. And I like that signing a ton just because they've been looking for an answer at the other edge rushing spot opposite of Kwity Paye, and even Paye to this point. Solid run defender, room to grow as a pass rusher. And Ebukam might be some of the same, more of a early downs guy and an impact run defender, and then we'll see and we'll take whatever we get as a pass rusher. But I don't know. I think he's made some strides there at San Francisco. It feels like that's a place where they develop these edge rushers and get that much more of them as a pass rusher. So I feel better about him as a pass rusher now versus, earlier on in his career. So maybe he could be that, breakout player. And I'm not saying he's going to have 16 sacks or anything, but maybe he could be a guy that on top of Kwity Paye gets you in that 8 to 10 sack area. That wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. They also have some other depth behind it. But I think the biggest signing they made during the free agency was definitely Samson Ebukam. I think he could be a reliable starter there at defensive end. So I'll give him a C+ for free agency. NFL draft grade, A. This is one of the teams that impressed me the most in the NFL draft. Because not only did they get the most important pick, right? Like Anthony Richardson, they got the quarterback of the future. I think Shane Steichen, another team where we could talk about the coaching hires. Love Shane Steichen as a hire. I'm actually really intrigued, especially now that we know the fit. Steichen plus Richardson. Feels like Steichen's been able to use a lot of the same tricks they used with Jalen Hurts. So that's awesome. But even just after that, like anytime we go Adibare in the 4th round, Julius Brent's one of my favorite corners and one of my favorite sleepers of the draft. They get him in the 2nd, but then Darius Rush in the 5th, and Jalen Jones, who's a perfect cover 3 corner for a cover 3 heavy defense run by DC. Gus Bradley, they get him in the 7th. Are you kidding me? Yeah, I mean, it was just one smart move after another smart move after another value pick after another value pick. I mean, this is one of the best Chris Ballard drafts I've seen during his time at Indianapolis. So over the moon about it. They patched up the defense. They added another potential impact rusher with Adibare. But of course, most importantly, they got Anthony Richardson. They have a guy who has the highest ceiling of anybody in this class. But because of his rushing building, I don't think the floor is all that low either. I think he could be the week 1 starter. And honestly, I think he should be. This whole draft cycle, I said over and over and over again, he looks like a guy who's only had 1 year as a starter. And the only way you're going to correct that is by having him on the field playing football. So please, I implore you, Shane Steichen, have Anthony Richardson as your week 1 starter. We know what Gardner Minshew is. He's a solid backup. Could be a top 32-ish quarterback, but he's a fringe top 32 guy. Let's see what Anthony Richardson can do with some playing time and some growth there as a passer. Offseason grade, I'll go B+ overall. Again, the draft is the big win here. And then I feel like this was a team that didn't need to win for agency. And that's where it's like, I gave him a C+, and Ebukam's really the one impact signing I look at. They didn't need to, overhaul this roster in free agency. They didn't need to go spend a bunch of money. They didn't need to do all that. So, free agency is kind of a smaller part of the equation here for the offseason grade. The draft is where if they were going to win one of 2 things for agency, the draft, I want them to win the draft. And that they did, of those 2 areas. So, B+ overall, and of course, the most important thing, drafting Anthony Richardson. Let's go. Let's see what this, quote-unquote project, let's see what this quote-unquote roller coaster is all about. Ton of upside to buy into here, and I think they got him a perfect offensive play caller in Shane Steichen to develop Anthony Richardson and try to hit the high side of his potential range of outcomes. Biggest question mark left is going to be corner, because Isaiah Rodgers coming off a really good year, but with the betting stuff, TBD on what that turns into. So we might not even see Isaiah Rodgers this year. Hoping for a bounce back season out of Kenny Moore in the slot. But if Rodgers, let's just say, misses 6 games, that means 6 games where we could see a cornerback tandem of Juju Brents. I guess Julius Brents is going by Juju Brents now on their official Colts roster. Interesting, but it could be Juju Brents starting on one side and Darius Rush on the other. It really could be. Or Jalen Jones maybe as a 7th round surprise starting. Because again, I think he'd be a great fit in that cover 3 defense. So, cornerback's going to be an interesting one. But if they get solid play out of those young players right away, this could be one of the best defenses in football. I guess the other free agency move to note here, EJ Speed, 2-year, $9 million re-signing. Him plus Shaq Leonard with how good Speed looked last year, that could be an awesome linebacker tandem. Add Adibare next to DeForest Buckner. You add to the defensive line with Ebukam. This team feels like a defense that's heading in the right direction, and of course, quarterback going to dictate a lot. But if they get solid play to those corners, this is going to be one of the better defenses in football. So a lot of weight on the shoulders of Brent and Rush and Jones for sure. Let's talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars now. They won the AFC South after going on an absolute heater down the stretch in the regular season last year. Another team that didn't do a whole lot in free agency, so easily the best move to me was re-signing Evan Ingram. He finally found a place that was fully taking advantage of his skill sets and basically using him as a slot wide receiver. And they also added another tight end throughout free agency to kind of balance the scales out a little bit more. So I expect to see even more of Evan Ingram basically being a slot wide receiver, which I'm absolutely here for. And again, I felt like the place that finally maximized or got closer to maximizing what the potential of Evan Ingram is this high-end athlete. So glad they brought him back, but they didn't do a whole lot really throughout free agency. So that's really the one major move of note. NFL draft grade, I'll go B-. I like Anton Harrison, but as much as I did like Anton Harrison, he was my number 3 offensive tackle. That felt like a knee-jerk move because the day of the NFL draft, Cam Robinson gets suspended. So it felt like they were like, oh shit, well now we need a tackle, so let's go get Anton Harrison. Maybe they knew ahead of time, but that's just kind of how it felt. My favorite pick, though, Antonio Johnson, the 5th round. You get Parker Washington in the 6th. It's not a bad one either, but Antonio Johnson, I'd have been happy with them taking him in the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, onward, all the way down to the 5th round. So it's a little weird that he fell so far. It feels like the NFL knows something I don't, but he was my number 2 safety, great strong safety nickel corner hybrid, both spots where I think the Jags can get better. I think they can improve upon Rashawn Jenkins. Antonio Johnson can be that. They can improve upon Trey Herndon in the slot, and Antonio Johnson can be that. So love that addition, great value. It's just going to be curious to maybe find out why he fell to the 5th round when I thought he should have been a 2nd rounder pretty safely. Moving on to the overall offseason grade, I'll go B-. Again, free agency, this was not a team that needed to overhaul the roster. They spent so much money the offseason prior to where cap was going to come into play here. So getting back Evan Ingram, that was the most important thing, and I think that's my favorite move of the offseason, just keeping a weapon in-house, especially considering, they got Calvin Ridley coming off suspension, but the wide receiver room still is not one that's like, wow, holy cow. It's not Cincinnati, it's nothing like that. It's not even Dallas, for that matter, where it's like Calvin Ridley's a good player. Christian Kirk fits the offense, was a nice number 1 target for a year, but you preferred him to be like a number 2 type of threat. So keeping Evan Ingram, and now it's like, okay, you got Ridley, you got Kirk, you got Ingram kind of serving as that number 3 target. Okay, there's enough depth and enough balance there, and they can win in a variety of ways through the air. So I'm glad they kept him around. Honorable mention, though, to Anton Harrison, especially considering the Cam Robinson suspension. That's a guy that I think, one, will step into a starting role and become really, really good right away, specifically as a pass protector. I think he'll be able to hit the ground running there and give him a solid baseline of play, replacing Cam Robinson. But, kind of leading us now into biggest question mark left, I guess. Anton Harrison was my honorable mention for best offseason move. Again, I have full confidence that he'll be able to hit the ground running at left tackle. Really, maybe the question mark should be right tackle, because it's Walker Little or Josh Wells, who Wells has not been all that great during his time in the NFL. But, as a backup 3rd tackle swing option, not horrible. But we're going to find out what Walker Little is now. Nice left tackle at Stanford, but the reason he fell to the 2nd round was because of all the injuries. Now he's flipping over to the right side, and he's had a small little bit of playing time for the first 2 years. Now he's going to have to start. It's a replacement to Juwan Taylor, too, which not only did they ask him to start, he's replacing a guy who was on the upswing and becoming one of the best pass-protecting tackles in football. So can Walker Little match that? Can you minimize the step down that you have from maybe Taylor down to Little? That's going to be a huge component of potential success for this Jags team. So Anton Harrison, but also honorable mention here to Walker Little as the guy who will need to step up if the Jags can get back to the playoffs. All right, last thing we talk about, the Tennessee Titans. They also went 7-10 last year. They lost in Week 18 to the Jags, and that's what gave Jacksonville the division. Will they ultimately finish 2nd in the AFC South? Free agency grade of C+. They're tricky in a different way where it's like every move they made felt like a move they had to combat to someone they had to release, right? Like, you lose Taylor Lewan, so they sign Andre Dillard. And they lose David Long, so they sign Azeez Al-Shaair. It just felt like, okay, well, we lost that guy. We need to find a guy to replace that starter, so let's just sign someone. It was just kind of trading one name for another at certain positions. That being said, Azeez Al-Shaair is going to be my favorite signing just because he's playing behind 2 guys that make the best linebacker tandem in football, and Fred Warner and Trey Greenlaw. And when we got to see Azeez Al-Shaair, he was a really good player in San Francisco. So I think a lot of that could translate to Tennessee, and now he's got a bigger role. I could see a breakout season in the works for Al-Shaair. Other than that, Arden Key, you move on from Bud Dupree. I actually think you might get a more efficient pass rusher in Arden Key. So it's going to be interesting to see what him plus Harold Landry and Rashad Weaver, what that trio looks like on the field this year. Andre Dillard could be in the mix here, but Dillard lost his starting spot to, granted, one of the best tackles in football in Jordan Mailata, but a 7th rounder in Jordan Mailata and a rugby player in Jordan Mailata. So That's a little tough to gauge where that might be going, but we'll transition now to the NFL draft because similar note there, honorable mention here has got to be Peter Skoronski. Could become a really impact, high-level starting guard right away. Maybe he ends up playing tackle. Could even see him moving to center. I actually think Jane Brunskill. Hopefully, our lads right now has Aaron Brewer as the starting center. I hope that becomes Brunskill's job, and then Radunz ends up playing guard, but we'll see how that competition plays out in camp. But the best pick here is Will Levis. Will Levis, the number 2 quarterback, kind of like 2A to CJ Stroud being 2B, kind of upside versus floor argument there to be played out. But I'm a big Will Levis guy. I think he had a shitty environment around him at Kentucky. I think at the NFL level, he'll become a better pro because of it. Has a ton of those tools, good mobility, strong arm, could fit a lot of throws into tight windows. I think a more accurate passer than people want to give him credit for. He was just playing hero ball last year at Kentucky, so the decision-making wasn't always that sharp. But I think it could get better at the NFL level. I still think it's going to be Ryan Tannehill who starts at least half the season this year and maybe even the entire year, which might not be a bad thing for Will Levis. Kind of just take another year to kind of reset, get acclimated to the speed of the NFL level, and also learn a playbook and just not be thrown into a bad situation, considering he's coming off a really rough situation in Kentucky. So I wouldn't mind him just getting a little bit of a buffer year kind of. But to get a guy that I saw as a top 4 quarterback, I thought the top 4 QBs this year should have gone in the top 10. So they got a guy who I thought should have gone in the top 10 at pick 33. That's absolute steal. And they now have I think a much more confident option moving forward versus Malik Willis as a Ryan Tannehill replacement. I was intrigued by Willis, but he was an upside play in a really bad quarterback class. Will Levis is kind of an upside play, but also, I think he's got enough tools and traits to give him a solid enough floor and a much better quarterback class. So top 4 guy versus the upside play in very different QB classes. I think you have to take that into account. Will Levis would be the guy I feel much more confident with as a Tannehill replacement versus Malik Willis. So that in itself is got to make it the best pick of the draft. So, but even Tajay Spears, you could throw him in as a potential Derrick Henry replacement. He's got a lot of the same stuff that makes Derrick Henry great. So this is a team that continuously drafts running backs. So who knows? Maybe they'll draft someone next year, and that's who going to end up being the Derrick Henry replacement. You just never know with Tennessee. Anyways, overall offseason grade, let's go B-. I think the best move, they kind of overall retooled the offensive line. Again, I'd rather see Brunskill move to center. You play Dylan Radunz at right guard. You let Nicholas Petit-Frere go into year 2 as a starter at right tackle. Andre Dillard at left tackle, let's just say, and Peter Skoronski at left guard. That, to me, sounds like an offensive line that should at least be average, middle of the road. Specifically, though, that left side of the offensive line, there's some upside. Again, Dillard, lost his job to Mailata, but I'm willing to give him a chance here in a new environment. And Peter Skoronski, especially in this team that runs a ton of wide zone, he could become one of the best guards in football right away, and we might be seeing a ton of, Tennessee running behind him. Therefore, just kind of boosting up his profile and giving him legitimate, all rookie team consideration right off the jump because Derrick Henry consistently is running behind him, right? So, yeah, I think they did a mostly good enough job retooling that offensive line. If I were to reword this a little bit, maybe, I think considering the pieces they lost, they did a mostly good job finding a replacement option, right? Like you lose Lewan because you cut casualty, you got to move on from that contract. Andre Dillard, of the options available, not horrible. If you're going to lose David Long, if you're not willing to re-sign him at 2 years and $11 million, which blows my mind, Azeez Al-Shaair is a good replacement for that. And if you're going to cut Bud Dupree because you have to, Arden Key is actually a solid under-the-radar type of way of replacing that production at a much cheaper price point. So I think there was a lot of shrewd moves here where it's like, we lost starters. We need to go kind of budget shopping for replacements. I think they did a good job of that this offseason. So, kind of rewording there and kind of looking in a different direction. I think there's a couple things that Tennessee Titans did well this offseason. Generally, the one place where they didn't, find a replacement was for Robert Woods. So, biggest question mark left, wide receiver. It's year 2, Treylon Burks. He definitely could be the guy that steps up. And I will say, I wasn't crazy about Burks coming out of Arkansas. He was better than I thought he would be last year. So, I'm optimistic about him going into year 2. But, Nick Westbrook-Akina, he was another one of those free agent re-signings. I don't really think there's anything super special there. I'm actually more intrigued by Kyle Phillips, who was this day 3 pick coming out of UCLA, tore up the Shrine Bowl, just looked like your prototypical white slot wide receiver. Very shifty, great agility, solid underneath route runners, soft hands, did a lot of those things that you hear, when you think about Wes Walker and Julian Edelman and, again, typical white slot wide receivers. He did that stuff. And for a team that's looking for all-impact wide receivers, I could see a world where Phillips has a sneaky productive season with, maybe 60, 70 catches, 700, 750, maybe 800 yards. few TDs in there as well. Like if he's consistently their starting slot wide receiver, he could have some solid numbers and maybe an under the radar kind of fantasy option, specifically in PPR leagues. But that will also be hinged upon Treylon Burks staying outside, because at Arkansas they moved him in the slot, but a lot of that was KJ Jefferson just wasn't ready as a passer, so they were just trying to put Burks in a spot where it was the easiest throw possible for Jefferson. But if Burks stays out wide, Phillips has a chance to become that every down starting slot wide receiver, and I think he might be an okay one, and at least take this from the worst wide receiver room in football to maybe wide receiver room 28, 27. It's not going to change the needle too much, but they need someone other than Treylon Burks to step up, on top of needing Treylon Burks to step up in year 2. But that is going to do it for my AFC South offseason grades. Let me hear all your thoughts down below in the comment section. Of these 4 teams, who do you think won the AFC South offseason race? Who had the best draft? Who had the best free agency? And overall, who do you think of these 4 teams had the best offseason overall? And on top of that, who are your favorite signings, favorite draft picks for these 4 teams? Love to hear those thoughts as well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hit the like button if you did. And if you're new around here, want to see more football content like this, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button while you're down below. But that is going to do it for me. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I am signing off.